Welcome, everybody, and my name's Ali Northfield, and I'm delighted to welcome here today Nathalie Nahai, our keynote speaker for Global Revenue Forum in London. So Nathalie is known as an expert in psychology, persuasive tech, and human behavior, and is also the author of the best-selling book, Webs of Influence, and a new book called Business Unusual, out recently. So Nathalie, a big welcome to you today.
Thank you.
And the combination of persuasive tech expert, psychology, human behavior sounds like a perfect storm. So how did you actually get to where you are today, and how did that all come together for you?
So it's a slightly sort of circuitous route. I have a background in psychology. I did a BSc in psych, and I, through sort of my 20s, ended up doing quite a lot of music. I'm classically trained in violin, and I play guitar, and I was gigging quite a lot and touring, and then got to a point where I thought, well, I don't want to pay someone to build my website. I'll just learn how to do it. So I ended up doing like an adult education class, and really loved it. And sort of back in the day when Flash was still alive and Dreamweaver, and that kind of took me down the web route. And in my mid to late 20s, I started thinking, well, maybe it would be useful to use this. And because I noticed how there is a lot of research already about how physical spaces shape behavior, I thought the same must be true for virtual spaces. And so I was like, there's got to be a master's or a PhD on this. And of course, back then it was 2010. UX didn't come out as a term really until 2011. And so there wasn't anything that I could get my hands on that was satisfying. So I thought, quite naively, I think, but maybe it was a good thing, well, I'll just write a book on this. I'll just write a book on the subject of the stuff that I want to read. And because I wasn't really a template, I kind of threaded all these different areas together. So I looked at marketing, cross-cultural psychology, social psychology, linguistics, color, which is actually quite hard because there's very little robust research around that lines things up because it's so culture specific. So anyway, I kind of pulled on all of these different threads and came up with a proposal, got it published by Pearson, and that kind of launched the career. And I kind of thought, well, I'll just create a consultancy because a lot of my peers are doing something similar. And no one was really ready to talk about applied behavioral science in kind of a tech context. So I ended up becoming a speaker to kind of educate people. I was like, this is really important, you guys. And of course, now it's a lot more common. UX is a standard discipline. And behavioral science is a lot more widely recognized for its utility. So yeah, that's how I got involved.
Wow, amazing. What a great journey.
Thanks.
And so you also go under the name of the web psychologist. So what does this sort of mean in practice, and how do you see it being applied today, perhaps differently from the early days of when you first started?
So I use that label to begin with, just to get people to have a sense of what it might be that I talk about, because people know about the web, they know about psychology, put it together. So I don't find the need to use it so much anymore. And I think the reason for that is because back when, in 2006 and 2007, when social media platforms were starting and they were reshaping how we use the internet and what we imagine it to be, there was a lot more, there were a lot more questions around, well, how do we get people to come back to this site versus another site? And I think now a lot of the practices that people use are much more well known. So, you and I have talked about this in the past. In your practice, use a lot of psychological principles. So things like price anchoring, or reducing friction, or chunking visual elements so that you're reducing cognitive load. Like, some of these things are now very well established. And so the way in which it's changed from 10 years ago to now I'm much more interested in looking at the deeper psychological motivations and structures that shift behavior. So now I'm thinking much more in terms of, and this is where Business Unusual, the book, comes in terms of using values to predict consumer behavior. How do you create cultures and organizations that have integrity, that can then transmit this in a clear and resonant way with clients who are demanding much greater depth from the organizations and businesses they work for and buy from. So it's kind of gone into a more complex, richer, deeper space, which is much more entangled with our day-to-day life and how we want to exist as human beings, as consumers, as employees. So it kind of goes into much more of the complexity, which is very exciting for me.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I think very valid for people who are anticipating attending the conference. Primarily, I think because at this stage there's such a lot of talk about differences and changes in customer expectations of what they do with their spare time and how they live their lives. And I think travel and hospitality in particular fits into that niche kind of like really, really well. But that said, sort of like taking it back to some more simpler things. What do you see as being the most popular uses of psychological tactics online? I mean, obviously with the revenue management approach, we tend to look at pricing quite a lot, but is there anything that you're seeing being used, which is kind of like the most obvious and popular uses at the moment?
So I think a lot of the pricing strategies that people use, whether it's price anchoring, so you show the highest product or service or hotel stay first, or you could use, urgency, there's only 5 rooms, that, these classic kind of techniques.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've seen used really well, which is it kind of treads that fine line between persuasion and coercion. And the reason it sits on the right side of it, I think, is because it's something which requires consent. It's kind of these dopamine rich wheels that you get, these kind of unpredictable rewards where you land on a site and you say to someone, okay, do you want to spin this virtual wheel to get an unpredictable reward? And that's nice because you're playing with price. You might give someone 10% off, you might give them £15 off or whatever it is. You're giving them the option to play, so you're getting their consent to engage. That's respectful. It creates a more kind of anticipatory quality to the experience, which, if you're talking about stays somewhere, you already want someone to start fantasizing about it and attaching that positive emotional state to the brand, to the vacation. And so I think something like that can work really beautifully to kind of whet people's appetites and give them a bit of a playful way to get money off and to build that excitement. And so it does a lot of things in one very simple way. So that's kind of something that I think is really worthwhile people exploring, if it fits with the persona of the brand, obviously.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, sure. And it is, it sounds like fun. I'm already.
It is.
It's not such a bad thing.
I play them when they show up. I'm like, oh, this looks good.
So I know that one of the ways that you kind of like express what you do is also using the word or the term ethics in the kind of what you're describing. And we know that psychological biasing can be, as you've already mentioned, there's this fine line between a sort of like good and bad. And the concept of a dark art has also been applied to pricing and revenue management in the very old days when people had no clue as to what it was all about. Is there, do you think, an equivalent of the dark art in the use of psychological tactics on the web?
Oh, yes. And that is such a good question. Very few people dare to ask it. So there's kind of a whole side of it called dark UX or dark patterns, which look at ways in which to hook people in unwittingly. Professor Harry Budnell does a lot of work around this. He's brilliant. He set up darkpatterns.org. And that's a really interesting place to see examples. But one example could be, I remember years ago, actually sort of being subject to this, getting people to subscribe to something without their informed consent and then charging them and making it hard for them to come out. And you'll be surprised how often people were doing this. And I had an experience directly, which I've screen grabbed for evidence from the Sunday Times. I mean, this is several years ago now, maybe 7 or 8 years, possibly, where they say, okay, sign up for, I think it was something like £1 for 30 days or something like that. So sign up for a small price for this fixed amount of time. And then being who I am, I was like, right, what's the cancellation clause? And I was screenshotting all of this. And I go through the cancellation clause and you have to go down, and it's not even written in bold in the terms and conditions, item, whatever number it was, cancellation. It's kind of something like subscription, and then one of the words was cancel. And so you had to spotlight search it. And then eventually you go through like 3 or 4 pages of kind of rabbit warrens to get to the point where they actually give the information. And I discovered that it was something like you have to call X number of days into your, like 13 or 14 days into having subscribed, but you have to call us on this number in order to cancel. And I was like, if you're subscribing digitally, why would I then have to stand in or like sit in line on a call and put a calendar reminder in my phone that is quite random in terms of number of days in order to not get charged 35 quid for the next month? Like, it was really, that for me classifies as a dark art. And so I use that as an example of worst case scenarios. But you can also do things like make it hard for people to sign up, add extra things into people's baskets, which sometimes people do, put in certain hidden clauses, or another one, which is, it kind of falls into that gray area where sometimes with a spinning wheel gamification thing, it will say, yes, enter my email. And then the kind of the opt out would be something like, no, I don't feel lucky, or no, I don't want to make the most of this deal. It makes you feel a bit rubbish for opting out. So there's these kind of more like mean ways of doing it, and then the actual financially coercive ways of doing it. So
I'm sure we've all been victim of something like that from time to time. I mean, I guess it's sort of then the very worst side of it goes into like the scams. Let's not even go there, but that's very depressing. So coming back to sort of pricing, I know that from a revenue management point of view, from a hotel pricing point of view, certainly the distribution of hotel rooms tends to be through third parties who are very powerful. But if a hotel is trying to do something directly through their own website and targeting their customers directly through that site, do you have any advice on what pricing tools in terms of anchoring or biasing or decoy pricing might be better to use, or any best practice around those type of pricing approaches?
Well, I think one thing that I've seen used, which works really well, is actually when you give people, it's around structuring your offer where you've got value and price, and then in order to reduce the price, you have to remove value. Which, for example, if you go onto a website and you've got, like, I really like boutique hotels, you go to a boutique hotel and you select your dates, and the first thing that they give you is the full package, like all the bells and whistles, the best room, breakfast included, maybe you get champagne upon arrival, maybe there's a free tour of something, however much you want to kind of zhuzh up the experience that the person can expect. And then one way to kind of shift that down is to then have options that people can deselect. Say, okay, you can, do you want a different room? So then they have to mark down, actually, I don't want superior, I want junior suite or whatever, or I don't want breakfast. And so when you have to physically uncheck boxes to reduce the price, but you're also reducing value, it gives you a way of showcasing the thing that you most want people to get. It gives them still agency, which is really important, again, especially for thinking about ethics. And as a consumer, I don't want to not have choice. So it's kind of, that's important.
Yeah.
But it also means that you're making it very clear to the customer what they're letting go of. And then it's sort of the loss aversion kicks in. It's like, oh, I could have all of this. I don't want to lose out on X, Y, and Z. So that can also shift kind of the proposition that someone will respond to. But I don't see it done very much. And I think it's one of these things where it could create a much better user experience. But then also, if you've got 6 different types of room, you don't want to do like your ultimate room. You want to make sure that if you've only got 3, then you can use it. So it requires a bit of discernment as well as to how you employ it. Sure.
And do you think there's one tactic that we should always consider? I mean, something very simple that's a kind of like no-brainer. Does that exist or not?
Well, there is depending on how you want to display the rooms. Typically speaking, people go for middle choices, and this is very simple. You see it online and offline. So if you're displaying people with 3 key rooms and you want, to sell the middle option, then make sure that you're aware of that particular bias, that people will go for what's displayed in the center. That's one. And then the other one is also just the price anchoring, which is if you've got a special room at a special rate, and that that's the thing where you've got the greatest margin, put that first. So those are the 2 things that I would suggest.
Lovely. I think that from the hotel's point of view, sometimes we get wrapped up with our lovely rooms and we put way too much on offer, and it's very difficult for consumers to know exactly where the good deal is because there's such an array of content, which can be challenging. But no, that's great. That's lovely. Thank you. And then sort of one final question. So we hear a lot about the changing expectations of customers and their search for something experiential. I know we've touched on this a little bit, but what does this really mean in terms of this new customer experience that they want? Any thoughts on that, and how hotels specifically could make this happen?
Sure. So I think there's a couple of trends that we've seen. I don't know if you've seen lots of ads. I don't know if you've seen these in the Tube, but here we're getting them a lot in Barcelona, where I am at the moment. there's a lot of adverts for travel, but green travel, so B Corp type travel.
Okay.
So something like that points very clearly towards one of the trends we see wider, in a wider context with consumers, which is, I want to have my cake and I want to eat it. I want to be aligned with my values, but I also want to travel, and I want it to be a memorable experience and something which I personally am going to get a lot of joy from, that I can take photos of, I can post it, but I'm also doing some good. So it's asking a lot, you know?
Yeah.
So one thing is to look at, how do you as a business, as a hotel, pull in some of these things? So it could be that you highlight that you source all your food locally, as sort of 0 kilometer type approach to food. Mm-hmm. It could be that you have reviews from people who are local in the area who tell you which specific places to go and eat, or which markets to. So it doesn't have to be baked into the business necessarily. It can be things that align with people's values, where you set up kind of an ecosystem for them to explore with specific partners. I think the other thing as well is this sort of personalized, getting the hidden side of wherever city or place it is that you're visiting. And Sordays do this really well, Sordays Travel. Well, they'll have some person go and review the various area sort of hotspots, and they'll write their personal account. And so there is this kind of quality where, instead of it just being loads of ratings and reviews, and you think some of them are probably going to be spoofed, which many are, you get someone's inside take, and then you've got the picture of them with their dog or whatever, their family, and they're saying, this is my favorite spot, and don't forget to check out this place. And so I think these are some of the things that really work well, that don't cost too much to implement.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm fascinated to see how revenue management and that sort of experiential sustainability, looking after the environment, kind of like all of that is going to get packaged into what we do, which fundamentally has to move away from just straight pricing, I think. So interesting.
Yeah, because you attach so much more value to pricing, but everything else that surrounds it, and that's where the gold is, I think, really, for everyone.
Absolutely, absolutely. Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. It's a lovely, lovely discussion. I'm really excited about you coming to London. So, and I'm sure, and I know that the people who've already actually signed up for the conference are really looking forward to hearing from you. So thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. I can't wait.
Look forward to seeing you in January. Many thanks. Take care.